Hey everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. I'm going to be taking your tough nutritional questions today. If you've got questions, especially pertaining to heavy metals, as we've been talking about this week, I'm happy to answer those as they come in. You can go ahead and put those in right now into the feed. And if you missed the show on heavy metals, you might want to go back and review that, especially if you suspect that you have an issue. We talked a lot about lead, cadmium, arsenic, mercury, thallium as potential dangers and potential downfalls to driving the autoimmune process, driving inflammation and creating health problems. And we talked about the nutritional strategies around how you can actually deal with heavy metals if you do have them, but also how you could protect yourself from ongoing exposure sources. So a good episode that you'll want to go back and watch if you didn't yet catch it. We can put that link, below here for you as well. So let's dive into your questions. Doris is asking about detox powder. So she says, I'm using detox powder every day, a third of a teaspoon in the morning and a third again in the afternoon. Is this doing any detoxification for me? Yes. Vitamin C as a vitamin has a lot of different functions, and one of its functions is actually it acts as a chelator, as a heavy metal antagonist or chelator. So using that, definitely you will have some benefit there. But vitamin C also has a lot of other functions beyond that chelatory or chelative function. One of the functions, just the physical effects of vitamin C in the bowel, is that it actually can help pull water into your bowel. And if you're constipated, that actually can help you overcome constipation. And remember, one of the really bad things about detoxification where people go wrong is when they're constipated. When you're constipated and you don't have regular bowel movements, then a lot of the toxins that are bound in your gut can start leaking across into your bloodstream and then going systemically throughout the body. So we want to make sure the bowels are functioning, and vitamin C can definitely help support that. Now, vitamin C also plays a role in the dilation of blood vessels and blood flow. So it helps to improve blood flow through the body, and this is especially true for many of you who are chronically inflamed. Remember, when you're chronically inflamed, producing different inflammatory chemicals from the immune system, that can actually have a thickening effect on your blood. And so vitamin C, because of its role in dilating blood vessels, can actually help support really great blood flow. It's necessary to produce nitric oxide, which is a Nobel Prize winning chemical that is responsible for the dilation of blood vessels. So lots of different impacts and effects that vitamin C can have for detoxification. Also, maybe we can put up a link below, Doris, if you haven't watched my crash course on vitamin C, that would be a really good resource, I think, for you to learn more about how important that nutrient is. Let's see here. Hi from Wyoming. Just wanted to thank you for sharing your knowledge with us every week while also seeing patients, researching, preparing for everything you do. I don't know how you get it all done. Well, I have a great team, Linda. I don't get it. I'm not a solo person. I've got Mel right here who's taking care of our video every week, and then I've got a great team in the back that really helps keep me organized and keeps me going. So, but I appreciate your appreciation of the work that goes into publishing this show twice a week. Is the soil which has no nutrients in which grains, that's not a question, more of a comment.
That's about it for
Okay.
Facebook on Tuesday.
Yeah, so many kitchen spices have been found to carry toxic metals. Another comment, and I would say, if you've got a big concern there, one, you can reach out to the different companies. Many companies do heavy metal analysis on their end product to ensure safety, for the end user consumer. But the other thing, if you don't have, and I encourage everyone to have this because it's pretty simple, even if you don't live in the South, is to have a nice little herb garden, and you can do like a window box, and you can grow very simply things like thyme and mint and oregano, these are all very simple and easy things to grow. Once you grow them, it's very easy to dry them and then basically crush them into a fine powder. You can use a pest tool, but this is not a hard thing to do. And when you grow your own and you control the quality of the soil and you control the inputs, then you have less to worry about in the way of toxic heavy metals. I think we're going to see in this next coming 10 years a big revolution in people reclaiming the sovereignty of where their food actually comes from. We've got, the last 100 years, we've really outsourced our food production to people that have betrayed us, right? To farming conglomerates and to big corporations who've betrayed our trust and basically produce an inferior product, but don't charge a small amount of money. So we're basically paying to poison ourselves by, having this solid trust in these companies who don't have our health in mind. And I think that revolution is right around the corner. Let's see, I was born in a copper mining town. All the pipes were also copper until the 80s. Yeah, copper sometimes is also a toxicity problem, especially where we see copper piping. I've seen copper elevations associated with especially mental disease in kids, ADD, ADHD, as well as learning behavioral disorders. So it's, again, one of those things that can also be measured for. Best comprehensive test for heavy metals. And probably the best thing to look at and to measure would be a pre and post provocation test. So this is a urine-based test. You talk to your doctor about it, but it's a test where you're looking for heavy metals in the urine, and a pre-test shows you your current ongoing exposure, and then you have a follow-up test to that, which is where you would take an oral chelating agent, something like EDTA or DMSA or DMSO, or even cilantro is a great chelator, N-acetylcysteine, alpha-lipoic acid, vitamin C. These are all great nutrients to use as a post-provoking agent. And then once you take a chelating agent, you will collect your urine for several hours after. So this is the standard type of test that can be done by your doctor. It's called pre and post urinary provocation. That's the kind of test you would ask for. Now, some doctors will want to run serum tests to measure for circulating levels of heavy metals in your bloodstream. These tests are not super accurate for chronic metal bioaccumulation. Remember, most people's problem with heavy metals is not acute poisoning. You're not going and getting a massive bolus dose exposure to cadmium or lead. It's the chronic low levels of exposure that you get from food and environment that you're constantly bringing into your body. And one of the ways your body tries to deal with that metal accumulation is it shoves it into tissues. That process is called bioaccumulation. And if you're measuring the serum, you're not going to pick up on high levels because, again, the body will distribute out of the serum. It will take those metals and push it into your tissues. And that's why you need a chelating agent to identify whether or not you're storing high levels in the tissue itself. Because when the metals go into the tissue, they create problems, many of which are associated with free radical damage to whatever tissue it's coming in contact with. So pre-post provocation for chronic bioaccumulation is the best way to measure. Serum testing, if you suspect you're being acutely poisoned or you're getting acute exposure, you could do serum testing, but it's less accurate for chronic exposure. Let's see here. Mary Beth says, do you know anything about burning mouth syndrome? Yeah, there's a lot of things that actually can trigger burning mouth syndrome. And metal, particularly mercury and lead and cadmium, I've seen cause burning mouth syndrome. I've also seen mold, particularly mold toxins, drive burning mouth syndrome as well. Different B vitamins like vitamin B5 and B12 and B1 deficiencies can lead to burning or scalding mouth syndrome. And so those are things to look at as well. Alpha lipoic acid deficiency can also contribute to burning mouth or burning tongue. So not sure about that, as it's more of a comment. Long-term effects, if any, of amnesia drug. You're talking about anesthesia. If there's long-term effects of anesthesia, a big part of that depends on the person. There are different people that have different genetic polymorphisms, if you will, that that don't tolerate anesthesia as well, or are more affected by anesthesia. They're now doing, my advice to you would be, if you're going to be going under anesthesia, they're now doing genetic testing to see whether or not you have different, polymorphisms that would make you more or less susceptible to different types of anesthetic. I know one example, and a non-genetic example too would be, one observation is that people that are extremely physically fit, the anesthesia a lot of times will wear off quicker. So those athletes will clear the drug a lot more effectively and efficiently, and so sometimes dosing has to be adjusted in those cases. What is the protocol for candida when taking caprylic acid and yeast shield along with probiotics? How many days do I take each, alone or combined, and when during the day? So the best way to go about doing it is, if you're using products from Gluten-Free Society, the caprylic acid is to take 4 a day if you're an adult. And also of the yeast shield, 4 a day of each. And you can take them together, so you could take 2 of each twice a day at the same time. Take your probiotics separately. Generally, the best time to take that higher dose, if you're using ultrabiotic defense, is in the evening time. And take that with a little bit of water. So it's a powder you mix in with water, and take that before you go to bed. And generally speaking, 8 to 10 weeks is the time frame that we recommend. Now, the first couple of weeks of that protocol, what you may notice, Isa, is gas, bloating, mood swings, intestinal discomfort, cravings, constipation and or diarrhea. These are pretty common side effects of what many would call die-off. And so if you're getting those types of symptoms, just be aware that it's not an allergic reaction per se. Now, if your lips swell and your throat closes down, that's an allergic reaction. Quit taking them. But most people are going to have some degree of die-off when they're embarking on a protocol like that. So just be aware of that. That shouldn't be a deterrent to get through, unless the symptoms are so great that you just can't function. In which case, discontinue and work with a health professional to guide you through it a little bit better. So bloating and constipation after eliminating grain is very common in people that also have candida overgrowth. So, this is kind of a two-part question. As I just mentioned, the candida protocol, but it's not uncommon for people to go grain-free to experience bloating and constipation if they also have candida overgrowth in their bowel. The other, there's simple kind of things, and we have an entire show on constipation as well. Maybe we can put a link up for that, and I'd encourage you to go back and watch that, and just make sure you're covering all your simple bases. Getting fiber and water, making sure you're sleeping, making sure you get adequate movement, especially in your spine, your lumbar spine. A lot of people that sit for long periods of time of the day are constipated. That lack of movement can contribute to it. So. Again, just doing fundamental basic things you may also find to be very helpful. Okay. What could be causing a pressure sensation on the eye, upon the eye? Could it be something to worry about? I've been true gluten and dairy free for 6 years now. There's a lot of different things. I mean, you could have some environmental allergies that could create eye pressure. You could have high blood pressure creating eye pressure. Best thing to do would just be to get it checked out. Have a good optometrist or ophthalmologist, take a look, make sure that you don't have increased pressure internally Make sure your blood pressure's normal. Make sure there's no damage or inflammatory issues going on around your eye or in your eye that you would want to be concerned about and take additional action on. If you want to take some nutrients just to support eye health altogether, one thing that we manufacture or produce is something called Focus. And it's a mixture of different eye supportive nutrients like vitamin A and lutein and xanthine and zeaxanthin, which are very potent antioxidants that are very supportive of retinal health. So could be something along that line as well. But you might also have other food allergies that could be playing a role in that, or food sensitivities beyond gluten and dairy. So getting those measured or checked for might also be helpful. And then, of course, nutritional deficiency would be something I would highly encourage you to look into as well with your doctor or healthcare provider. Can alpha lipoic acid and omega-3 supplements be taken together to support neuropathy and overall health? Yes. There's no interaction or contraindication for using alpha lipoic acid combined with omega-3 at all. So, you could take them at the same time and you'd be just fine. Other than HLA-DQ2 and DQ8 for celiac, which of the other genes indicate non-celiac gluten sensitivity? So it's more not which genes, it's the same genes. There's HLA-DQ, there's HLA-DQ alpha-1, HLA-DQ beta-1 gene. And on these two genes, there are different patterns. And so DQ2 would be a pattern on those genes, as would DQ8. But the other two patterns for non-celiac gluten sensitivity are DQ1 and DQ3. And as I've mentioned before, if you're doing like online DNA testing through some of these big DNA banks, they're not measuring DQ1 or DQ3. Most of them are just delineating DQ2 and DQ8. If you don't have those, they don't really mention ones or threes. It's part of why we offer a genetic test that teases out ones and threes, twos and eights as well. So it's the 1 and the 3 that are the non-celiac gluten sensitivity gene patterns. What causes fluid-filled blisters on the roof of the mouth? For most people, it's one of two things. It's either going to be a lack of, or I should say a lack of, an exposure to food that your body's immune system dislikes. Right, so whether it be a subacute type of food allergy reaction or delayed hypersensitivity, or it's going to be food that is just an irritant because the state of the mouth itself, the mucosal lining of the mouth itself, is compromised. So in this case, some people react more to hot or spicy types of foods, not necessarily because they're allergic, because their mucosal barrier is compromised, and those things can irritate that lining, or some type of microbe. So microbial imbalance within the mouth, abnormal bacteria, abnormal fungal issue with somebody that has a pre-existing inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. Usually, at least in my experience, in the mouth, it's the food that's creating the irritation. So I would look toward food sensitivity testing to rule out any food triggers in regard to that. Do all people with an autoimmune disease have a gluten sensitivity? I can't speak for all. Dahlia, I can say this. I've never tested somebody with autoimmunity and found them to not have gluten sensitivity genetic predisposition. So that's not to say it doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist in my world and in my in my experience. And so that's 21 years of practice. Over 10,000 people. I've yet to find a person with a diagnosis of an autoimmune disease not be gluten sensitive from a predisposition gene standpoint. So does that mean it can't happen? I won't go so far to say that, but just not in my experience. Are kelp noodles and konjac noodles okay? Yes, they are. Just got to watch out for any other added ingredients with them. Is tinnitus due to low dopamine? No, not necessarily. Most people have tinnitus as a result, at least in my experience, tinnitus can be caused by heavy metal toxicity. It's a very common, lead is a very common cause of tinnitus, so is mercury exposure. I've seen parasites cause tinnitus. I've seen B vitamin deficiencies cause tinnitus. I've seen gluten in a very big way cause tinnitus. So, and then there are the physical damage to the ear. A lot of times when farmers who've been driving tractors for years and years, loud, heavy machinery and noises, you can damage your hearing frequencies, and that also can contribute to tinnitus. So there are a lot of potential reasons why tinnitus can develop, but low dopamine, I wouldn't say that is a primary thing that I've seen in people with tinnitus. So question on, I'm not sure, Sabral, what you're meaning. So you have ankylosing spondylitis, and you had 50% improvement in 1.5 months going gluten-free. And if you mean grain-free versus gluten-free, I would say first go grain-free if you haven't already. Now, if you have gone grain-free and you're plateaued in your progress and your improvement, then you need to follow up with a doctor who's versed in autoimmune arthritides and get some testing done, because there are other triggers beyond gluten and grains for ankylosing spondylitis. It's very common to see other food reactions in AS. Dairy is very common in that disease. So too is sugar. Sugar is a very common reaction that people have with ankylosing spondylitis. So those would be the two other options. If you haven't read No Grain, No Pain, I'd say start there versus just going grain-free. Go on the phase 2 diet and No Grain, No Pain, and see if you can break your plateau. And if you can't, then you need to look at getting additional testing done. Let's see here. Latex fruit syndrome. So latex fruit syndrome is, there's a similarity between certain fruits, tomato being an example, that resembles latex. So people that have latex allergies sometimes don't do well with tomatoes either, because there's a molecular crossover or similarity that the immune system can have, and so reacting to those can also be an issue. So if you're allergic to latex and you're struggling and you haven't looked at changing your diet, that may be something you want to look into, are foods that fall in that latex family or category. I love this comment. So Jenny says, hello from Washington. Thank you for No Grain, No Pain. For the first time I've learned that all grains have gluten. It saved my life. I was getting dementia from gluten. In the past 3 months, my brain is mostly normal again, and my high blood pressure is almost normal as well. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for sharing that experience and outcome. I'm really excited. Those of you who get good results, I love it when you come on the show. It really keeps me going. Let's see here. What? Dry fasting and sauna not combined? No, question is, do dry fasting and sauna help with detox from heavy metals? Probably sauna more than dry fasting. Infrared particularly, not like your local gym wet sauna, but your infrared saunas are where I've seen really good clinical outcomes when people who are trying to expel heavy metal from the body. I've had a lot of MRIs and gadolinium dye injected. How can I detox? Do you get heavy metal from CTs and X-rays? You don't get heavy metal from CTs and X-rays. You get heavy metal. You get the metal from the dye, or the dye materials that are typically injected before the imaging. So, example of that would be like a gadolinium being used prior in imaging. Other example would be like a barium swallow test, where they have you swallow barium because it lights up when they take the image. It lights up the intestine. So those are the things that, yeah, you do want to get them out. Now, I know a lot of times the doctors will tell you that naturally your body will be rid of those metals, those dyes, within a few weeks. I've never seen that be the case. I get people all the time. I've had people that 20 years ago had a dye injected in them for an imaging test, and they still have that dye today in them in very, very high amounts. I think maybe some people are better at clearing them than others. But if you're looking at how to naturally support detoxification, if you've had that kind of imaging done and you're not sure whether or not, that's a problem, because some people do react, quite negatively to some of these dyes, these radioactive dyes. Just from a supplement perspective, I would recommend Ultra Metal Detox. If you haven't heard of that, you can check it out. It's at, we'll put a link up for you below, but it's a mixture of different agents. It includes things like alpha lipoic acid and cilantro and NAC and acetylcysteine and EDTA, as well as fulvic acid, to help replenish healthy minerals. And so it's a good support formula if you're looking for a way to kind of support your body after those scans. Yeah, so a couple comments. Happened to me. I got so sick from a pin in my front tooth, silver pin in my front tooth. Dentist refused to look at the possibility. It was making me sick for many months. So yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon. When you put metal in the body, I mean, beyond the fact that many toxic metals, as we talked about on Tuesday, have negative impacts and inflammatory impacts on different tissues and structures. One of the things that we really haven't even taken a deep dive into with a lot of these metals is as receivers, as electromagnetic frequency receivers. Metal and electromagnetic fields have reactions, they have reactivity together. And so, I know some people, when they get, for example, when they get metal implants, they start having negative reactions as a result of that when they're around Wi-Fi signals, or when they're, especially when they're around close proximity to those signals. So that's something we haven't even really entertained or talked about at this point, but it's definitely a physiology that occurs. Question about fulvic acid. Again, fulvic acid is basically it's a compressed. Well, shilajit is, so shilajit is a type of fulvic acid, but fulvic acid is really like a blend of trace and ultra trace minerals. It's very dense and very rich in minerals, and so it's a supplement that sometimes people will use to get more minerals within their diet or within their body to help support their normal function. But fulvic acid's perfectly fine. But some fulvic acid products you got to watch out for. I've seen some of them contaminated with wheat and other grains, with other fillers, and so you want to be careful if you're gluten sensitive to check your ingredient. Is it possible for two individuals in the same environments to have very different mycotoxin test results? It's possible. There's a lot of variable in that question, Julie, because if it's two individuals, do they sleep in the same bed, in the same room? Do they work in different areas of the house? Because with mold and mycotoxins, there can be an area of the home that is where the source of the mold or the source of the problem exists, where one person may be spending more time in that area than the other person. And so we might see some fluctuation in levels between the two individuals. We also can see individual variant differences in how people are capable of detoxifying or removing mycotoxins from their system. Some people are better at it than others. And so that may also be the case. And again, with two individuals living in the same and working in the same environments, having slightly different results. But then the other variable is which testing methodology was used. I've seen some of these mycotoxin tests, the methodologies are not as good, and so you can get some mixed results. At least that's been my experience. So there's really, for mycotoxin testing, there's really only one lab at this point I recommend, and they're in Texas. That's Real-Time Labs. So, that may also be a variable in the differences that you're seeing in your family. Barbara's asking, want to make sure I'm getting the minerals I need, especially with doing a heavy metal detox. So wondering about getting my CalMag ratio right. Do I need to watch the amounts I take, or will it be okay to take magnesium through the day and calcium at night? I mean, you can take them simultaneously. The good ratio between calcium and magnesium is 2 to 1, and if you're worried about ratio, just taking them together in a 2 to 1 ratio is perfectly fine, as opposed to taking them separately. When would we need to do vitamin and mineral testing? That's a loaded question because I have a very biased opinion, Barbara. Every 6 months. If you're using lymphocyte response testing, which is intracellular testing, every 6 months, because lymphocytes have a 6-month life cycle. So what doing that, using that type of technology allows you to do is it allows you to get a window of the nutrition of a person over an average of a 6-month period of time. So every 6 months you'd want to retest because nutrition is not static, it's dynamic, it changes, right? It changes based on what you eat, how you exercise, how much you sleep, what foods you're eating, what season it is, how much stress you're under, whether or not you have an existing disease or not. Like nutrition is so dynamic and it changes as time changes. So you really, if you're trying to be as preventative as possible, ideally every 6 months, twice a year, as kind of a general checkup. Usually with my experience, the longest I ever, if somebody's coming to me in my practice, the longest I ever let them go or like to see them go is 8 months maximum, and that's pushing it. So I really like to see it at 6 months if we're going to stay accurate. Because what happens if you go beyond that, your nutritional needs may have changed dramatically, and now you're missing things, and you're maybe taking things you don't need, but missing things that you do. And a lot of times when people wait too long, what we see is the tests don't improve with time. Generally, if you check every 6 months within a degree of regularity, you see a person who's trying to recover from chronic autoimmune illness, you see their nutrition status. Every 6 months, it just gets better and better and better and better. But when you see them delaying testing and changing what they need, you see this pattern of a bad result, and then 6 months later, it's another bad result. It's just different. And so to avoid that, every 6 months is ideal. Interesting. So, Sina, good to hear from you, Sina. So glad to see a picture of your smiling face. A friend of mine says she smells like cat urine, as if her body is emitting a cat urine smell from her sweat glands. Any idea why someone could smell like that? Yes. It's not uncommon in mold. So it'd be interesting to have her do mycotoxin testing to see if she's got high levels of mycotoxins coming out. A lot of people in mold quit sweating, and so they don't even recognize a smell from their sweat. But once they start sweating again as they're detoxifying, we actually will oftentimes have that urine-like quality to the smell of their sweat. So that would be high on my list of suspicions. What do you recommend for candida biofilm? Great question. So biofilm is like a coating that is secreted by candida and other bacteria. So different microorganisms secrete. Think of it kind of simplistically as a protein dome that they use to cover them to protect them from your immune system. It's part of how they can dig in deep within your body and not be detected by your immune system and not be effectively removed. So one of the best things to use for biofilms is proteolytic enzymes, because proteolytic enzymes naturally will degrade biofilm without hurting you. We have a formula called matrozyme, which is a very potent blend of different proteolytic enzymes that I like to use for this very thing. And if you're using that, we can put a link up for you for that. You have to take it on an empty stomach. Generally, a standard amount to take is about 6 to 8 capsules a day, and it's generally 2 pills on an empty stomach, 3 to 4 times a day. Now, empty stomach means either before you eat, waiting 30 to 45 minutes after you take the pills, or waiting up to an hour after a meal before you use it. Otherwise, what happens is the enzyme itself will help you digest your meal, and you don't want that. You're wanting it to digest the biofilm, not your food. So again, that's why it's to be taken on an empty stomach. So the question's coming in about chocolate. Is 2.5 ounces of chocolate a day? It's an organic chocolate, a brand that I've reviewed, Evolved Chocolate, for those of you who are looking for a quality chocolate. Know that the company that owns Oreos just recently bought out Hue Chocolate. Now, I don't know what kind of changes that company's going to make to the process or the quality that Hue Chocolate had, but my advice would be maybe lean more toward Evolve now that Hue's been bought out by a major company who really doesn't care about your health. That being said, the question is, eating 2.5 ounces of chocolate, an average of 5 days a week, is that bad? It's my only treat. I eat very diligently otherwise. It's hard to say, Jessica, because number one, all the hubbub about lead being in chocolate here recently, I'm still waiting on scientists to revalidate that. Remember, one of the things in research is you perform studies, and then other people have to be able to replicate those studies before you just run for the hills and call it fact. So is there potential for lead in chocolate? Yeah, I mean, there's potential for lead in a lot of different foods, but is eating 2.5 ounces of that particular brand of organic chocolate going to be enough to drive up and bioaccumulate lead in your body? I can't answer that for certain. I would say if you really like and enjoy that chocolate, one thing that you may consider doing is a post-provocation toxic metal test, once or twice a year, and looking at your lead levels to see, with that as part of your diet, is lead going up to a level that could be potentially harmful to your health? And if it is, then you can have the capacity to make a better decision. Now, another option in that situation would be do things that support your body's ability to, detoxify lead. Again, I mentioned this a minute ago, metal detox, ultra metal detox as a support supplement, using that in small quantities periodically, as a safety measure, if you will, similar to the way we recommend using Gluten Shield. We don't recommend people take Gluten Shield so they can go eat gluten. We recommend that they take it when they're eating out or eating food that was prepared by others, just in case of cross-contamination or hidden gluten, to give them a layer of protection. Well, you use Ultra Metal Detox kind of in the same way. Not saying go out and enjoy tons of food that we know is contaminated with heavy metal and just take this and you can still enjoy those foods, but you could use that as just as a shield of sorts. But testing would be, the best answer. Always test versus a guess if you're really concerned about it. How would you support the body before an MRI? I wouldn't. An MRI is one of the safest forms of imaging, honestly. There's nothing I would really do any differently before an MRI. Now, if it's an MRI where they're going to inject dye, then there's nothing I would do differently up front in the beginning. But after the fact, I would use high doses of vitamin C and high doses of alpha lipoic acid, and I would use metal detox, ultra metal detox. If somebody were asking me what can I do to support myself after the fact, after a dye injection, those would be the things that I would use in an individual who was seeing me. So Shannon's asking about tracking foods. She's trying to track what foods cause symptoms, mainly loose and urgent stools. What is the transit time of a meal from mouth to anus? It's very, very different, Shannon, for different people. Anywhere from 12 to 36 hours, and sometimes even longer, depending on the individual. I think we did a pretty comprehensive piece on transit time. You know what I'm talking about, Mel? We're going to post, Shannon, we're going to post an article and video on gut transit times so you can do a deeper dive as you're trying to do that tracking. I would say this, it's not a bad move on your part to try to figure that out. But I can just tell you from experience in working with other people who've tried to do the same thing, it's very, very challenging if you don't know what your transit time is. And even challenging beyond that, because you may not have food that's a trigger. You may have like a bacteria or a candida that's actually a trigger as well. And so that can kind of throw a loop in what you're trying to track. But nonetheless, we'll post that for you, and hopefully that's helpful.
It's bottom of that for right now.
Okay. I can't seem to really get into the groove of a way to eat. I've had constipation for over a year. People say fiber. Well, that hasn't seemed to work. A woman said she did carnivore and had constipation. I'm not sure I see the question of that. TC, are you asking me if you do carnivore, if you did carnivore and your constipation finally went away? Well, that's not uncommon. Many people struggle with some of the compounds and chemicals found heavily in plants, oxalates, histamine, histamine-producing components, lectins, amylase trypsin inhibitors that slow down digestive function are very common items found in plants. We're also always, the rhetoric in today's world is like plant-based diets are going to save the earth, and that's part of why I had Jane Buxton on the show, author of the Great Plant-Based Con. If you missed that show, I would highly encourage you to go back and watch it. We can put a link, below for that show. But sometimes people are actually genetically, their bodies don't do really well with a lot of the plant-based foods, because plants also produce chemicals that are designed to prevent you from eating them into extinction. And so those very chemicals can slow down digestion, cause GI inflammation, contribute to forms of autoimmune disease and other health issues. So the one-size-fits-all diet approach is really a bad idea. Even if you can even argue that with the own diet that I recommend as a general tool for people to follow, which is no grain, no pain. If a person is reactive to oxalates, for example, then eating a bunch of vegetables high in oxalates is a bad idea for that individual. This is why you also always hear me talk about test, don't guess. If you're not sure, you can ask your doctor to perform a 24-hour oxalate test in your urine. If your oxalate level's coming out high, then either you're not breaking oxalate down, or you're eating too many oxalates, or you have a yeast overgrowth, because yeast can produce oxalate inside of your GI tract, or you have mold in your environment and it's suppressing your immune system and leading to an oxalate elevation through bacterial suppression of the GI tract. I mean, these are common causes of why people start to react to plants as well. And so sometimes carnivore is the right move for these individuals to make. They do better going in that direction, but it's not the long-term answer in my experience. It's never really the long-term answer. Addressing the GI tract and making sure the gut and the microbiota of the gut are well balanced, and making sure the gut is sealed, making sure the immune system is calm is what needs to happen, because a lot of people that go carnivore originally do really well, and then it's, again, long-term, there are problems that can be associated with that. And so we want to bring balance back to the diet. Remember, humans, as a general rule of thumb, we always try to strive for some degree of balance. That being said, I don't want to shame anyone who's gone carnivore and had great benefit, because I know, and I've seen it and I've witnessed, miraculous life-changing benefits of doing that diet. But again, why is that diet so helpful? I have a number of reasons why I believe it to be so helpful. Number one, it's grain-free, so there are no glutens in it. And so, many people are gluten sensitive and don't realize it, and by going carnivore, they're actually going gluten-free. Number two, carnivore diets, for the most part, cut out all the different types of lectins and oxalate and other plant biochemicals that are known to irritate the GI tract. And so when somebody generally has got a chronic autoimmune disease, their GI tracts are, as an assumption, are typically very irritated. And so removing all of those different plant-based items oftentimes allows for the GI tract to heal and repair. So again, the diet can work, but it's the long-term piece. If you're going to do it long-term, I highly recommend you're working with a professional who will be measuring and testing you through that process to make sure that you don't end up imbalanced in some other way. Is it possible to detoxify from radium? It is, but the number one rule of any detoxification plan is to get out of the environment. So like with radium, you obviously want to stop exposure, but then beyond that, the same way you would detoxify. Remember, there's 4 pathways of detoxification. One is through your stool, one is through your sweat, one is through your urine, and one is through your breath, through your lungs. And, so amplifying the functionality of those 4 target organs or systems is crucial to successful detoxification. Maybe we need to do a whole show on just detox. Because there's really there are nuances to detoxifying certain things versus others, but at a general rule of thumb, you really want to accelerate and advance the health of those 4 areas so that you are capable of taking out the trash, so to speak. Can we all assume we have heavy metals and do some detoxing? And do you recommend taking breaks during a detox, like a week on and a week off? So anytime we do chelation with somebody who we know has a metal problem, we do cycling always with metals. So the cycling is 3 days of chelation followed by an 11-day break. So it's not even as aggressive as a week on, a week off. It's 3 days on, 11 days off. And this is because when you're pulling toxic metals aggressively, you're not just pulling toxic metals, you're also pulling healthy metals. So you're pulling calcium and magnesium and zinc, and you don't want to just prolongedly detox using chelating agents lest you cause a mineral deficiency, which is another reason why we test people, as we go through the detox process, we test them at 6-month intervals to make sure we're not inducing a mineral deficiency simultaneously. So if you're just talking about making the assumption that everybody has some level of metals, I think the best thing that you can do in that regard is just eat really high quality, clean foods. Make sure you practice the art of deep breathing. We're actually getting ready to do a show on that very topic. And then make sure you also have regular bowel movements and aren't constipated, and make sure that you have steady urine flow throughout the day. A lot of people become dehydrated, don't drink enough fluid, and that's how toxins can back up into your system as well. So those are just intelligent things to do every day to ensure that your body has less capacity to hold on to those toxic metals. Now, if you want to make the assumption and you want to do like a detox periodically, you could use, again, something like Ultra Metal Detox, where you cycled 3 days of use followed by 11-day breaks, a few cycles a year. Just if you're not testing and you're just trying to guess, it's something you could do without really incurring any great risk on your health. Is cocoa live culture probiotic yogurt good for candida? I generally, when people have candida, I don't recommend yogurt of any kind. Generally because there's usually sugar residue in yogurt that's left, and what we're trying to do with candida, one of the factors, Vic, is to starve out the microorganism. Candida is a fermenting microorganism. It loves sugar. So if you feed it carbohydrate sugars while you're trying to kill it, your success at being, your odds at being successful are going to be dramatically reduced. So you really want low carbohydrate if you have candida and you're trying to get rid of it and be successful about it. And that includes things like kombucha as well. A lot of people ask that question about kombucha and yogurt, as a source of probiotic to help with yeast. If you're going to eat fermented foods while you have candida, the best would be the fermented vegetables, the salt ferments, which generally don't have any sugar in them, like sauerkraut would be an example. If you like it spicy, kimchi, fermented cauliflower, fermented carrots, those types of things oftentimes make for good, healthy probiotic food-based sources. I tried all kinds of ways to get rid of my yeast overgrowth and dysbiosis with supplements and diet. I still seem to get a lot of gas and bloating. Any suggestions? Test. I mean, at the end of the day, do you have a yeast overgrowth, or do you have the assumption that you have a yeast overgrowth? Get with a good functional practitioner and get some testing done to make sure that's what actually is going on. Because, those two symptoms, gas and bloating, can be caused by a lot of different types of problems. I mean, I've seen people with pancreatic insufficiency have a lot of gas and bloating, and it had nothing to do with yeast. So I'd say need to do a deeper dive, especially if you've done the diet and you've done all kinds of protocols. Do a deeper dive on what actually is the core of your problem. Am I a fan of goat and sheep milk? I'm not opposed to them if you're not allergic to dairy. But I'm not a fan of dairy as a staple, as a predominant staple in human diets of any variety. I mean, unless it's a baby. You have to remember that dairy is baby food, right? If you really think about what dairy is designed to do, dairy is food for baby animals. I mean, human dairy is food for baby humans, but so breastfeeding, right? But you don't see adults breastfeeding. I know most of you probably grimacing at that thought, right? But it's very common in our culture that dairy is a predominant staple. But you have to remember that dairy contains a lot of different hormones and other biological agents designed for growth of baby animals, and so some of these can actually have impacts on humans that aren't not necessarily things that we want. So dairy as a predominant staple, I'm not a huge fan of. Now, I think that there are people that can tolerate it okay. I think there are some nutritional benefits to some dairy. It's not all bad and no good, but I think it's very much up to the unique individual. I mean, the vast majority of people that I see with autoimmune disease do not tolerate dairy. And if they try to bring it back in their diet, they get sick again. And so it's just maybe my opinion on this is a little bit more biased, say, than just the general population, because the people I see again, are people with autoimmunity. But as a rule, if you've got autoimmune disease, dairy is something I highly discourage from any animal. How do antibiotics affect your body with mold there too? So if you've got yeast growing in your body and you're taking antibiotics, one of the worst ways to accelerate yeast overgrowth is to use an antibiotic. Antibiotics knock out bacteria but allow for yeast to continue to thrive. So if you've already got a yeast issue, antibiotics can exacerbate it and make it worse. So that's not a good thing. This is one of the reasons why I always recommend that people culture. If they're going to take an antibiotic, don't assume it's a bacterial infection. A lot of times people go into their GP. The GP doesn't culture them. They don't run any tests. The person goes in, they got the sniffles, they got an earache, and just here's the antibiotic, right? No test. Well, what if that infection is not bacterial? What if that infection is actually fungal? In that case, the antibiotic will make the problem worse. And this was published like 15 years ago. It was a study, I think it was even performed in the Houston area, which is where I live, and that they found that, I think it was, don't quote me on this, it was like 90+% of all upper respiratory infections were actually fungal and not bacterial. And that means that if doctors are not testing appropriately before prescribing an antibiotic, they're actually creating a bigger problem for the patient long term, and they're setting them up for recurring yeast overgrowth and infection. And I've seen cases where doctors threw antibiotic after antibiotic after antibiotic at people, of course, didn't do any good, and what they really had was a fungal overgrowth, and that was never tested for, so they never knew about it. So get tested with antibiotics. I did an entire piece on that you might want to read too. Maybe we can put that link up on antibiotics. Can glycine detox glyphosate? Yeah, it can. they're competitive with each other, and glyphosate displaces glycine, among other nefarious effects. But yeah, I mean, so if you've got a major exposure to glyphosate that you're trying to get rid of, I mean, there are several things that you can take, glycine being one of them, fulvic acid being another, tryptophan being another, tyrosine, the aromatic amino acids, very helpful in those pathways, as well as alpha lipoic acid and vitamin C would all be good strategies of choice there. If you want to learn, those of you who aren't familiar, I mean, probably most of the world at this point is familiar with glyphosate. I actually had a long conversation with Stephanie a few years ago. Maybe we can put a link up. It's a glyphosate mimicking gluten, but great interview where you can get a little bit more insight on that topic. I take 1 ounce daily of plant-derived minerals. Would that be enough to prevent deficiency? The only way you're going to know, Shirley, is to test. To be accurate about knowing. I mean, it's not a bad idea, but I don't know. 1 ounce daily of plant-derived minerals doesn't mean a whole lot to me. I mean, how much calcium, how much magnesium, zinc, selenium, chromium, copper, etc., is in that 1 ounce? If it's negligible amounts, then probably not going to do a whole lot. But if it's supportive in really strong amounts, then you may be on the right track there. It's just hard to say without knowing specifically dosing. So Monica's asking about beans and chickpeas potentially being a problem similar to gluten in the gut. And yes, so Monica, the reason why phase 2 diet of no grain, no pain avoids legumes and beans is for that very reason. We're trying to give the GI tract basically a reprieve from the plant-based chemical damage that it's taken on. And so taking out legumes is one of the strategies that oftentimes leads to recovery. So yes, there's definitely a similarity. So ALT and AST and homocysteine were measured. What else can be measured to check the liver status? So a couple of other things you can ask your doctor to run. One is ferritin. If your ferritin's high, that can indicate liver damage. Number 2, C-reactive protein. Number 3, bilirubin. Bilirubin's a chemical produced by the liver, but also by red blood cells as a part of their breakdown process. So having bilirubin, direct bilirubin and indirect bilirubin all tested for can also be insightful for liver function. And then another one called alkaline phosphatase, or ALP. These are all basic blood work. A lot of them are typically done on what's called a chemistry screen that many doctors do in like annual checkups. So those are all good things to look at. How can I heal tendonitis in the hip thigh area? Hurts crossing one ankle over the other. Also hurts climbing stairs, sleeping in bed at night. Yeah, get to a good chiropractor or good physical therapist, because it's hard to know. You may have a movement pattern issue. You may have a spinal issue that's leading to imbalance. You may have a neurological impingement that's leading to imbalance. You have muscle weakness. I mean, there are a number of different possibilities. So I would say get with somebody who understands, the neuromusculoskeletal system really well and can help better guide you on what kinds of stretches, what kinds of exercises would be good to rehab that pain away. What do I think about TIDCA supplements for leaky gut? I don't. I don't believe that you take a supplement, any one type of supplement for leaky gut. And the reason why is that leaky gut has multitudes of different causes. I mean, if you look in No Grain, No Pain, I list in a diagram in that book, there's 11 causes that I list of leaky gut. And TIDCA is not on the list of any of those causes. So taking it is not going to fix the problem. With leaky gut, you have to understand why it happened and not just take something that can be supportive, but understand why it happened in the first place. There's a question about doing a niacin flush. So who would not want to do niacin flush? If you have elevation in liver enzymes, a niacin flush is probably not a good idea for you. Too much niacin can elevate liver enzymes. So if you already have elevated liver enzymes, again, I wouldn't recommend that. That's ALT and AST, by the way, the two enzymes that typically are indicative to measure. How much time needs to pass before you can retake the heavy metal test after beginning chelating? Generally, we put people on 6 cycles, so 6 to 8 cycles of 3 days on, 11 days off before retesting. So if you're looking at doing something like that, Maria, that's a good estimation for time and quantity of use. Does metal toxicity have any correlation with lichen planus or grains? Well, metal toxicity oftentimes is caused by grains, so there's correlation in that regard, meaning that high levels of rice consumption can lead to cadmium and arsenic and high levels of lead exposure. But gluten, I've seen cases where gluten-free diets led to the resolution of lichen planus. But is there a correlation between actual metal toxicity and as being a causative agent in lichen planus? Not to my knowledge. I won't say it couldn't be the case. I'm not aware of any research correlation between the two. I was born and grown up to the age of 12 in a city with heavy metal production factory. Is that warranty for metal toxicity? It's definitely, if that's the case, it's definitely something you would probably want to check, especially post-provocation testing to see what you've bioaccumulated. Let's see here. I would like to get your vitamin C. How much can a 6-year-old child take that has constipation? So it's not like how much can a 6-month or a 6-year-old child take. It's, start low. Start with like 500 milligrams in a 6-year-old, and just slowly increase the dose. You start with 500. If that's well tolerated, but the constipation's persisting, go up to 750. If that's well tolerated, constipation persists, go up to 1,000. So it's like increase the dose a little bit each day. You're not going to hurt anyone with vitamin C orally because the tolerance level of vitamin C happens in the bowel. So by the time you're getting too much, you're actually alleviating the constipation problem. But start low and work your way up. I've had 6-year-olds in my practice on as much as, in some cases, 5 and even 10 grams of vitamin C, although I don't start them there. I usually start them at the bottom and then work my way up slowly with them so that we don't just create a massive diarrhea event in their bed. I cannot eat citrus. Is your supplement based in citrus? Which one? If you're talking about vitamin C, no. It's an organic African sweet potato, so it's not a citrus-based vitamin C. So I think I answered that one already in terms of detoxing from MRIs with gadolinium. High dose lipoic acid, 800 milligrams a day, vitamin C, 5 grams a day, as well as I would use a product like Ultra Metal Detox, 4 capsules a day, and I would do that for 2 to 3 weeks after a CT with a gadolinium dye. I like this comment. I want you to know what you are doing is amazing work. YouTube has recently recommended you to me. I've developed POTS 5 days post shot and suffered tachycardia and epinephrine overdrive 24/7. I hate to hear that, that you've had that problem. Support your body with NAC, N-acetylcysteine. If you're an adult, 125 pounds or more, 2 grams, 2,000 milligrams of NAC a day, along with a really, really solid nattokinase supplement and a proteolytic enzyme like matrozyme. Those would be things. And then two, I would highly recommend a no grain, no pain diet in that situation. And even though grain maybe isn't what caused your problem, there's actually studies now coming out, and I've seen this clinically as well, where people that have post-vaccine problems as well as long COVID really responding well to grain-free diets. I mean, really super fantastically well. So actually, I think we have an article coming out about that here pretty soon, you know, with my experience as well as with what some other researchers are observing. And I love that YouTube recommended us, because we've been like being censored for 3 years now, and we just noticed the censorship, whatever happened in their algorithm went away, and so now we've picked back up where we left off before the plague, so to speak. I love that. So you know, the same comment from the same individual. I assume you mean diet change has actually been reversing the tachycardia that the shock caused, and that you're excited and hopeful for the first time. I'm excited and hopeful for you. I think that's fantastic. I was given an indoor electrical grill that has copper and titanium grill elements. Is this safe to use? Gosh, I don't want to comment on whether or not it is. I'd have to actually investigate the product and look at where it was manufactured and how it was produced before I would be comfortable commenting on that. You know, because where it's made, in my opinion, is going to matter, and the quality of the product is going to matter, and whether or not the metal is a coating or whether it's solid is an issue. What's underneath the copper titanium grill elements? Is it a coating or is it a plating? You know, there's just a lot of factors there, Lois, that it's hard for me to give you a really solid commentary about. I have my results from your food sensitivity test. I had been avoiding peanuts due to lectins. I did not show reaction to peanuts on the test. Can I assume that organic peanut butter is okay for me? Yes, provided that you don't react to the lectins as well. So lectin reactivity is not the same thing as like having a sensitivity to peanuts. They're two different things. But if you want to try introducing them, you can. Where you have to be careful with peanuts, that I have seen in people that are going in the no grain, no pain direction, is number one, peanuts can be contaminated with aflatoxin A, which is a type of mold toxin that is not good for you, right? And so peanuts are sometimes a source of that, so you have to be careful. Number two, peanuts are very high omega-6. So if you haven't had your omega-6 3 levels checked, if you're making peanut butter a staple food in your diet, you could really drive up your omega-6 fat ratios, and that can increase inflammatory responses or increase the exaggeration of pain and inflammation in the body. So, you know, there's some other things to be cautious about with peanuts, but if you're not allergic or reactive to them, I don't necessarily have a problem with them per se. Opinion on the use and interactions of herbal nootropics in people with Hashimoto's. I mean, there are lots of different kinds of nootropics, so it just depends on which ones that you're referring to. Generally speaking, I'm not a fan of using herbal supplements on a daily basis for enhanced cognitive awareness, because they're drug-like effects. And again, I'm not opposed to using herbs. I'm not opposed to using them at times, but even traditional cultures didn't use herbs every day to get the most out of every day. And I think what happens in industrialized countries is when we find something works or makes us feel more energy or makes us have more focus, we then tend to adapt to using them on a daily basis. And so there's an initial benefit followed by a loss of benefit over time. But remember, anytime you medicinally push systems, whether it be drugs or herbs, there's always going to be a latent long-term price to pay. It's just not something I'm a fan of doing every single day. Now, if you were going to use like a supportive nootropic for, you had a test coming up, or you had a major work project coming up, or you really needed to be sharp and focused today, like that's the time to take advantage of those types of products. But just for use as an everyday thing, just to try to, get through life and have more energy, I don't recommend them in that way. What's my opinion on using amphotericin B to detox from mold mycotoxins? I don't think it's necessary. I think you can detox from mycotoxins using charcoal and zeolite and Saccharomyces boulardii, and other probiotics, as well as proteolytic enzymes, and then lack of exposure. I mean, just getting out of the environment altogether. I don't think you need amphotericin B. I've never used amphotericin B with any of the people that come to see me for detoxification of mold toxins, and I've had plenty of success without it. Is it normal for collagen to cause bloating? Yes, if you take too much. Collagen is a very thick and rich protein, especially if you're using like our Ultra Collagen, which is a very premium, highly concentrated collagen. Some people will say, okay, if I take a full scoop, I do get a little bloating, and that's because it's very rich, and you can back it down. You see this happen a lot in people who pick through like the pressure pot, like of a good roast or good chicken, and they're pulling out all the collagen parts and eating those. You'll see a lot of gas and bloating that can happen if you get too much collagen, and that's true of anyone. So just quantity matters, and so just back off on the dose and see if it still happens. Let's see, what time is it? So okay, we'll go do a couple more here. Go down just a little bit on that feed. So Tracy, on your question about potassium being high, I didn't see your original question. Maybe it was lost in the feed somewhere, but hard to comment on it. Love that. Dana says, I started reading your book when it arrived yesterday. Thank you to all involved. I'm going grain, gluten, and dairy free after decades of daily migraines, which have gotten better eliminating foods. Love it. What do you think of taking B vitamins right before bedtime? I think for some people, it will keep them awake. Give them jumpy legs. So be careful of that. If that's happening to you, it's best to take those B vitamins before like 4 p.m., maybe even before noon. Some people are really ultra sensitive to stronger B vitamin complex formulas. It's part of why we developed Ultra Nutrients the way we did. It's lower in B vitamins so that that doesn't happen, because a lot of people who are really sensitive to high doses of B vitamins tolerate it very, very well. Deborah asks, why am I nauseous every day? Is it allergies? I mean, that's a pretty broad question. I would say, you could be. Food certainly is a driving factor for nausea, among other things. Bacterial imbalance or overgrowth in the GI tract can be a cause of nausea. H. pylori can be a cause of nausea. Damage to the lining of the GI tract can be a cause of nausea. So you've got a long list of different potential possibilities. You probably should get with somebody and get worked up. Adult daughter has Crohn's. I assume you mean because of the Crohn's, she had a colostomy, which is a surgical removal of part of her colon. Liver, kidney, and bladder problems. Where do we start? Boy, I hate to hear that you're going through that. I think where you start is where she's at. Some people, I'll say it like this, I would start with no grain, no pain if your daughter were open to starting with no grain, no pain. A lot of times some people are not open to starting there. They think I'm a super aggressive, super stoic, over-restrictive type of doctor. We get that criticism a lot. Usually those people that criticize us come back 6 months later when everything else failed them. If your daughter's willing to start in that no grain, no pain place, that's a great place to start without any testing. Now, because she's had so much done already and it sounds like she's got quite a complex issue, she really should be working with a doctor who understands functional premise to causation of illness. So let's not say don't work with a traditional doctor, but the methodology of traditional medicine is treat symptoms with drugs, but we're never going to find out or understand why the symptoms happened in the first place. And so drugs generally will have a shorter lifespan of how long they'll actually work before then they have to be escalated to new drugs. And before you know it, you're on multitudes of medications that have their own unique side effects profiles and other potential risks and problems, but you still haven't gotten to why the problem existed. And so functional would mean finding a doctor who looks for why the problem happened. When we're talking about inflammatory bowel disease, there's two big reasons why inflammatory bowel disease happens. Number one is the food the person's eating, and number two is the microbiome, the milieu of bacteria living inside of the intestines and colon that are either imbalanced and raging out of control. For example, Clostridium difficile, C. difficile is a very common cause of inflammatory bowel disease. Whether or not your doctor's ruled that in or out, don't know. But again, those would be good places to start. Number one, philosophically, with no grain, no pain. Number two, finding a functional doctor who's willing to go down the rabbit hole with you and really get down in the trenches and understand why that thing is, why those symptoms and why those problems are happening. High protein, low carb breakfast without eggs. So you're asking me an example of that? Or no crap protein powder. If you want a really good protein powder, ultra pure protein is my go-to for the cleanest protein powder. And if you really want it clean with nothing, you can get it with nothing in it. I mean, we have a chocolate or vanilla version that are stevia sweetened, but you can also get a flavor-free version that will take on the flavor of whatever you add to it. So if you don't do well with stevia, or if you don't want chocolate or vanilla, you can mix in your own blend. Recovered from SIBO. My urine smells. Urinalysis says no infection. I drink a lot of water with sea salt. Just had labs done, and potassium was high. Not be my problem. No, potassium. Depending on how high it was. Generally speaking, if it was a 0.1 or 0.2 above the reference range, that's not going to be the issue. That's probably a more in-depth question to tackle with me later. Can you be gluten intolerant and not have a gluten allergy? So, understand that there's allergy, there's sensitivity, and there's intolerance, and none of those are the same thing. And I've done this tutorial on that particular topic. If you really want to dive into gluten intolerance versus gluten sensitivity versus gluten allergy, I would encourage you to check out on Gluten-Free Society. There's a comprehensive article and video called "What is Gluten?" Maybe we can put a link up for you so that you can watch that, because that's a pretty lengthy explanation, but it'll give you the breakdown of that answer. And the answer to your question is yes, you can be gluten intolerant and not have a gluten allergy. Okay. Last question, because it's heavy metal related. If we have candida, do we have to rid heavy metals first because candida lives on, can you scroll on that one? Because candida lives on metals. I would argue that candida doesn't live on metals. I don't know where you've heard that. It's not at all. I don't know where you heard that. That's a strange sentiment to me, but so the answer is no. You actually have to get rid of candida before you can get rid of metals, and that would be, in my opinion, the proper order, simply because you need your GI tract to be fully functioning and fully capable, because one of the ways you get rid of metals is through the GI tract. And so if you have candida overgrowth and your gut's inflamed as a result of the candida toxins and other things, other side effects from the yeast, because candida also produces alcohol, so you'll get an alcohol production. Your gut becomes a wine factory. You've got to get that cleared out before you can go on and use your gut as a primary agent or route of excretion of heavy metals. So yeast before metals. Okay, is it lunchtime? I think it is. I'm hungry. My stomach is growling, so that tells me it's time for me to go. Hey, thank you so much. If you enjoy this show, if you value the information that we bring every week, do me a favor. There's a couple ways you can support me even without spending a dime. And one is to hit that like button below this video. The other is to share it with somebody. Share it with 10 people. If you think somebody that you love or care about could benefit from this information, please make sure you spread the message. And then lastly, you could subscribe. Those are all things you can do for free, where you can continue to get great information while also supporting us and helping us overcome the censorship. In addition, if you are looking for high quality nutritional supplementation, if you'd like to incorporate some of the types of testing that we talk about, like gluten sensitivity testing and food sensitivity testing, a great way to support our mission is to use Gluten-Free Society for those things. That is our sponsor. We are ad-free minus Gluten-Free Society. That is the only ad you'll ever see in any of our content or any of our information, because we don't want outside influence creating a nefarious message or an undue influence over the decisions and the quality of the information that we provide to you. So, please, if you appreciate me and you appreciate what we bring to the table, please consider supporting us at Gluten-Free Society, whether you buy supplemental products to help nourish your family or whether you are interested in doing lab testing. Those would be great ways. Beyond that, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week, next Tuesday. Remember, we're here every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, and then back again on Thursdays at 12:30 for live Q&A. So we'll see you next week. Have a fantastic weekend.